Which of it has been the best, the finest of it? There won't be any trick questions, you stated. Perhaps the nicest thing about it, in my opinion, is that when we first came up with the idea, we thought of this. The 7 ladies whose voices tempered his spirit and stoked his imagination are now revealed by Robert Plant, the golden-throated alchemist for Led Zeppelin. These shout-outs are not informal, they're sensitive hearths and volcanic explosions. Each of them was a natural force that developed his own narrative. His romantic reeries were broken into fiery bits by Janis Joplin, a primeval force of heartbreaking poetry and blistering soul, who was the first soul to sear Plant's senses. As if struck by cosmic lightning, he remembers that electric night in San Francisco. Like a comet created in anguish, Janis sprang from the mists. His own protected myth was being peeled back by her primal scream. Every note she let go was an unreserved confession that was both sensitive enough to hold 1,000 unshed tears and harsh enough to shatter glass. Plant heard the thunder of rebellion and the whisper of vulnerability in her voice, a contradiction that tore through his delusions and carried the seeds of his fantasies. She did more than just play music. It was a brave demonstration of survival in a society that was ready to stifle women's suffering and a sacrificing right. He felt the electric anguish of her scars combining with his own, a shared pulse of need and liberty, as he trembled chords to accompany her shout. Janis's echo lingered in Plant's veins long after the final refrain subsided, an enduring pain that motivates him to pursue genuineness over coziness and passion over gloss. Each time he has the courage to speak the truth into the darkness. Tina Turner, the phoenix rising from the ashes, was next in line. Her voice demolished every doubt Plant ever cultivated with her tempest of gospel fire. The quake from that white night aisle is still in his chest. Through Zeppelin's sacred shadows, Tina's roar, which started as a whisper of embers in the twilight, exploded into a conflagration of defiance. Where he believed he was untouchable, his bones were pounded by her tenacity. Each letter declares that scars are jeweled souvenirs of survival rather than signs of weakness. She glided like a goddess wrapped in victory on stage. As if calling redemption from the ashes of her past, she raised her arms. Plant learned that the most sacred song is forged in the furnace of sorrow, as he observed in awe as her gospel-infused war cry turned agony into strength. He felt a new respect for vulnerability and unadulterated enchantment when he saw the reflection of his own suppressed trembling in her eyes, which were sorrow masquerading as swagger. Alchemy was embodied in their uncommon duet. His lyrical sorrow blended with her call and response wail to create a tapestry of fire and shadow that was brighter than any solo could be. Plant stood on the precipice of humility and wonder as Tina's last note rose into the starry sky. She had created a crown of flame out of anguish while dancing on the rubble of her own history. And in that glowing aftermath, he learned the true meaning of change and the holy beauty of rising from the ashes again. Or, for that matter, how your daughter lover behaves with you. How do they relate to you after all? Well, as you can see, she is unique because this is happening in France. Then came the night-bound enchantress Stevie Nicks, whose voice was a battle cry and a lullaby, casting velvet shadows around Plant's heart. She was a shimmering shadow that glided through the backstage darkness when he first saw her, a ghost at the border of a moonlit dream, her presence infused with ancient magic, half-hidden truths, soaked into her words as she talked. Every sentence contained a menace and beautiful contradiction that made him doubt everything he had ever known. Stevie was both predator and prey on stage. Her whispered poetry had the power to catch 1,000 souls in a single breath before exploding into thunderous crescendos that broke the silence. She taught Plant that the pause between notes is where fear and desire meet, and he watched in awe as she turned silence into tension. He was reminded that seduction is found in contrasts by her songs, which were rose petals and thorns that were tender to the touch, but had the power to extract blood. He felt himself dancing on the brink of her paradoxes throughout their few collaborations. Her steely glare drives one moment to stark confession, while her delicate harmonies caress the next. She pushed him to accept the darkness in his own voice and to find beauty in wild desire. After she left, her echo lingered in the air, an eerie call to investigate the duality she represented, light and evil. Patti Smith came out of the storm like a ray of ferocious clarity. Her presence sliced through the remaining shadows of Plants like a razor and a blast. He saw that tragic alley in London as a testing ground. Patti's voice sounded more like a manifesto than a song. His complacency was a tinder, and every word was a spark. He saw the unvarnished cost of survival in her eyes. He experienced the splintering and cracking of his own love illusions as heartbreak turned into immovable conviction. She presented him with a paradoxical challenge. Her poetry was tender but harsh, a whisper with the power of a hurricane. She expected flaws to be exposed where he had sought perfection. She exposed the strength in agony where he clung to solace. His bones were scorched by her flame-forged resolve, demonstrating to him that genuine rock does not conceal suffering, it declares it, burning grief into an honest victory. Thus, Plant stood forever altered, his own myth charred away and replaced by a flickering ember of courageous truth. As Patti's silhouette vanished into the mist, in her wake, he found not only a muse but a mirror that reflected the raw, ferocious core of rock. Then, like a sonic whirlwind, Joan Jett, the streetwise rebel, exploded into Plant's world. Her screaming riffs tore through his blue-soaked brain as she was unrepentant and leather-clad. Her shriek was like a challenge placed at his feet, challenging him to dance in the naked thunder of primordial truth and to pull off the velvet curtain of his own myth. She tore the serenity from his veins and ignited fireworks in his blood with each chord she struck, a proclamation of war against complacency. Plant saw her control her guitar like a live beast under the flickering stage lights, her voice alternating between pained longing and razor-sharp resistance. He felt the echo of his own suppressed need and aching for freedom, which he had long concealed under Zeppelin's glory. When her anthem of grit and glory broke the stillness, the moments they spent together in the studio sounded like live wires. His hesitancy was burned away when her jagged power chords connected with his melodic licks, creating a new alchemy of fire and shadow. A tempest's echo echoed in Plant's heart as Joan left, leaving the air both vibrant and hollow, a fierce reclamation of self that still echoes in every stomp of his stage-bound strides. He recognized that in her fierce reflection, he found his own unsilenced howl. Annie Lennox appeared as a moonlit apparition in Plant's universe before anyone knew her name. Her androgynous elegance, a dance of fragility and strength that is paradoxical. He recalls their secret studio session where the air was heavy with unspoken desire and lit by flickering candles. Each note of her crystal-clear voice, which glistened with furious beauty, was a shard of pain that spilled over him like molten glass. She whispered confessions of hope and despair in that quiet haven. With surgical accuracy, her words cut through his shields. Plant's protected shields crumbled in the light of her unafraid vulnerability as his pulse sank to her beat. By encouraging him to reveal the wounds he had concealed, she taught him that being honest might cause just as much pain as it could relief. The studio went dead as she sang the last refrain, and he stood shaking, stunned by the unadulterated strength of her work. With each chord he played, Plant carried the echo of Annie's whispered pain, learning that true closeness in music is created in the furnace of shared frailty. Last but not least, P.J. Harvey, the storm-forged poetess, arrived on PL's globe like a reckoning with a voice like raw thunder and whispered wound. Her guttural chant, which pierced through the cloud of the crowd and burned his blood with its primordial ferocity, was the first thing he heard of her in a crowded London dive. Time shook in that instant. The surface of his own calibrated melodies was being torn apart by her voice, which was a living crack. Across the smoke-filled air, their gaze locked in a silent covenant of mutual ferocity. PJ's presence on stage was volcanic fury. Every word was oozing with pain and defiance. Once the pillars of his own mythos, Plant's bass lines seemed weak in comparison to her rebellious rage. Their teamwork was explosive in the studio. His mind was ignited by her unvarnished poetry, and his chords tried to quench her fervor. But her fury could not be subdued. Rather, he learnt to accept it. It was terrifying, thrilling, and endlessly alive to work next to PJ Harvey. It was like being at the brink of a chasm. She pushed him to remove all of his comforts and reveal the ragged wounds hiding underneath his golden god persona. In her unafraid transformations, she turned sadness into rebellion and tears into scream. Plant saw the blueprint for a possible rebirth of himself. He stood hollowed and reborn, holding her volcanic echo in every tremor of his song as her last cry faded into quiet. Why reveal them now? And why these 7? Because Robert Plant's path has been a trek through the unadulterated elements of sound and spirit, a furnace of thunder and whisper. The primal energies that sparked his alchemy were these ladies. Every interaction was both a storm and a haven. Janice threw him into the depths of reality with her heartbreaking wail. He learned how to transform scars into coronets, from Tina's phoenix flame resiliency. The hallowed force of quiet was made evident by Stevie's moonlight mystery. He was urged to burn his complacency to ashes by Patty's rebellious poems. His own need for purity was reflected in Joan's resistance of the primal rift. Like liquid glass, Annie's crystallized vulnerability sliced through his armor. Additionally, PJ's volcanic rebirth hinted that every performance is a death and resurrection for true creativity. Together, they created a constellation of contrasts that mapped the edges of his own tensions through the rupture and reconciliation of light and shadow. He heard his unsaid suffering in their roars. He found secret resilience in their voices. They were his mentors, his opponents, his inspirations, the uncontrollable lovers who would not be subdued. And as their voices filled his veins, he came to understand that music was more than just a show. It was a lifeline, an invitation to face fear, embrace vulnerability, and rise above loneliness. Because of the sirens, who taught him that rock's greatest strength is not spectacle, but rather survival through beauty and rebellion, Robert Plant now stands on the threshold of gratitude rather than a stage. As a tribute to the alchemy of the feminine energy that molded a legend and taught him that to sing is to endure, their echoes will always resound in his chords.